All right, we're recording. So I'm with Ted Ogden and I'm Emma Pringle, and it's April the 19th at 2 o'clock. Where do you want to begin? Do you want to just introduce yourself, and you're also going to talk about your dad?
My name's Ted Ogden, and I live at Alpena here in Randolph County. And I worked roughly 5 years on the track here in Elkins and around Laurel Bank and Cheat Bridge and Bayard, and got laid off every year during the winter time. So finally I started my own business and never went back. I did keep my seniority.
What does that mean?
I could go back to work. I just take a physical. I could go back to work anywhere that my seniority would carry me.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Bayard would be the closest place, but I'll never go back. It's been too long. I started work here in 1981, and at Bayard, and they put me on the tie gang, replacing ties in the main line. And I worked that summer. And after that, laid off for the winter. In '82, I worked a anchor spiking gang. Started here in Elkins, and we worked out through Kearns and Montrose and Parsons and up through the Blackwater Canyon into Thomas. And '83, I worked a lot of different places. Here in Elkins some, Bayard some, Cheat Bridge. '84, I spent most of my time at Laurel Bank working in the section gang. And '85, I worked here in Elkins, and I worked at Cheat Bridge. And then the flood hit, and we worked just wherever we had to go to get the track back in service. It really tore up a lot of track everywhere. And we worked 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, till we got the track back in service. And that was the last time I actually worked for the Western Maryland or the Chessie system. '86, I worked a little while for a contractor tearing up the Darden branch. And that was the end of my time working on the railroad. My dad went to work here in Elkins in 1947 as a brakeman on a steam engine. And he worked here a while, then they shipped him up to Spruce, another station up on the mountain. And he lived in a boarding house and worked out of Spruce for, I don't know how long. And he worked Spruce and Burgoo and here in Elkins. And he worked all over, clear to Cumberland, Maryland, and Connellsville, Pennsylvania, and over at Bow West, over next to Worthington, West Virginia. And he retired out of Elkins here as an engineer in 1985.
How did you get to working for the railroad? Did your dad introduce you?
He told me they was hiring, and I come in and seen Clyde Cosner. He was the track supervisor. And me and my older brother Eddie went to work the same day on the track. Yeah. I looked at this list here. When I was working on the tie gang out of Bayard, Frank Fortney was the foreman, and every guy that got to run the tie gang wanted to put in more ties than the previous guy, so we worked hard one day and broke the record, put in more ties than had ever been put in a day's time.
What was the record?
Well, as I remember, we put in over 700 cross ties in one day.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know if it might have got broke again after that. I don't know.
If you don't look, then you don't know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I liked working on the railroad. It was a pretty enjoyable job. Some hard days, hard work, a lot of the stuff was heavy that we had to lift, ties and rails and things. Got hot in the summertime. Yeah. One time I was working chauffeuring for a foreman out of Laurel Bank named Punk Bodkins, and we was high railing back down from Mount Airy to Laurel Bank. We had an old Dodge truck that'd been wrecked and the frame was bent, and of course I'm young and I wanted to run faster than I should have. And he just told me, he said, if you don't slow down going around this turn, we're going to derail. And about that time we left the tracks. He was a little upset, but he got over it. Yeah. And it wasn't long after I went to work, the roundhouse burnt. It was in '81 the roundhouse burnt. And they laid off a lot of men working in the car yards.
Do you remember anything about the fire itself?
I was here when it was burning. Seen it, yeah. Couldn't get over, close to fire departments and everybody was in there, but it was a pretty big fire. That was in November, I believe, '81. And my dad run the last scheduled train up through the Blackwater Canyon in '83 before they closed the track down. And also on the Durbin branch, he took the last run to Durbin. Yeah, that was in '83 also. Yeah.
They laid off a lot of men after the fire. Do you remember anything more about that?
Well, we was on a different seniority roster, so them guys maybe had 20, 30 years in. Couldn't come and take my job just getting started. They just had to go do something else or move to another place where they had a car yard to finish their time out. And the same with when they closed down the yard and the section here in, I think, December of '94. They brought the last load of coal off of Cheat Mountain up here. And all these guys that was working here on the track and the trains, they had to go somewhere else to work. And a lot of them traveled and finished their time, and some of them just quit. But that ended the railroad here in Elkins that had been here for 100 years. And at one time they told me there was over 1,100 men working out of Elkins here, between the track and the trains and the car yards, and that was in the '50s. That's a lot of people. A lot of good paying jobs, long gone.
That's a whole city, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just imagine if we had 1,100 here, good paying jobs come to town today, what it would mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen how Elkins has kind of changed since then? Anything that you noticed particularly?
Oh, it's went through a lot of changes, we've lost a lot of our good paying jobs, like I was just talking about here. It's geared more toward tourism industry, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't get very many high paying jobs, and a lot of them are seasonal jobs. We really need something here that would bring in a good industry that pays a good wage, and the people here wouldn't have to leave and go other places to get a good job. Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about your dad's time at the railroad?
Well, when he started, they still used steam engines, and the brakeman had to walk the train and set up brakes coming down the mountain. They had one started from the front, from the engine, and one started from the caboose, setting up the brakes as they come off of the mountain. And didn't matter what the weather conditions was, ice or snow or a storm, and it was dark at night, they had to go set them brakes up, and they would meet in the middle of the train wherever, and they just sat down until the engineer would give them the signal with the whistle to start knocking the brakes back off, and then they would go back to the caboose and the engine. Tough job, dangerous job.
How so?
A lot of them got killed. They have to jump from car to car in the middle of the night, or maybe ice froze on the cars, and a lot of times they didn't make it from one car to the next.
Huh?
Anyway, he made it, and when they switched from steam to diesel there in the mid-50s, he got laid off for a little while. And then that's when he had to go to Cumberland, Maryland, or Connellsville, Pennsylvania, or somewhere like that to hold a job. And he finally got back working out of Elkins and Baird and Laurel Bank to finish his time out. Took an engineer's job. He's a brakeman, and he was a flagman and a conductor, and finally an engineer. And retired as an engineer. I think he was an engineer about 15 years, maybe. Yeah. He enjoyed his time on the railroad. It was a good place to work. Mm-hmm. Good people to work for and work around. Yeah.
So what would you do when you would get furloughed in the winter?
Well, I'd go usually find a job of doing something else. I worked building some well locations for a drilling operation one time, and worked over here at Elkins Iron and Metal one winter, scrapping engines. Just one thing and another. Worked construction a little bit one time, but in the winter a lot of times there wasn't too much going on, and just draw unemployment until they called me back to work. After my time on the railroad, then I got into the excavating business and trucking, still doing some trucking yet today. Don't do much excavating anymore. I got about 2 years to go, and I'm going to quit. Retire.
What did your dad do when he retired?
He farmed, and I farm a little bit as well still. And he always put out a big garden. That'd keep him busy all summer working in the garden. And he had some cows and stuff like that. They lived to be 93 years old. He's been dead 2 years now. I don't know, I don't think there's anybody left living around here that went to work in steam days that's still living. I think Harold Ice was the last one. He died last year, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what were some changes that you've seen in sort of the railroad industry?
Well, when I went to work, we were still controlled by people from the Western Maryland. That was our company, and then they merged in with the B&O and the C&O to form the Chessie system. And after Clyde Cosner retired, we got a supervisor up here from the B&O, a younger fella, and a lot of the men didn't like him, and things started to change. A lot of the old ones was just retired, didn't want to deal with it, because there's a lot of different rules and regulations and things that didn't make a lot of sense, but that's the way it was.
Did you have any of the other questions? Did you have answers for them?
Oh, yeah, I did have their, I worked up at Cheat Bridge on a derailment. When we had a derailment, they worked you till they got the track back in service. You didn't stop. We worked 37 hours straight through, and they'd bring out the camp cars, and they'd have people there cooking food, and they'd feed you every 8 hours. You stopped every 8 hours to eat and then go back to work. Pretty well wore out after 37 hours of working. They don't remember what happened, what wrecked the train, but turned the caboose upside down. And big mess to clean up. A lot of coal cars upset, and a lot of coal to move to get the track clear where you could repair it and get it back in service.
Did you work on derailments a lot?
Worked on two. That one at Cheat Bridge, and another one over at Mount Airy. It wasn't too bad. I don't remember. I don't think we worked more than 15 or 20 hours on it. Got it back together. But some of the older men told me they'd worked 50 some hours on a derailment, just walking around like zombies, you know, no sleep, and actually dangerous. You're out that long and you can't even think straight. But that's the way they done it. Keep working till you get her done.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah. They said they could make more box cars and coal cars here in Elkins than any other shop that the company had.
Yeah?
Yep. Yeah, it was a high production facility.
It must have been amazing, and it's weird to see that there's just so little out there now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, to somebody that don't know about it or never seen it, it's just hard to imagine what was here at one time. When they closed we called it the mountain up through the Blackwater Canyon, and they closed it down, and all the trains went down through Billington and down to Grafton. And that hurt us a lot, you know, that cost us a lot of jobs when they closed that down. Closed the Darden branch down, that eliminated another section of working men.
And they all just either moved to different places to get more railroad jobs, or they retired?
Yeah, if I would have stayed there, I would have had to travel to Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, who knows, Kentucky, Virginia, you know. And they wanted you to live like a gypsy. You didn't go to one place and stay there. You worked here for so many weeks or months, and then you go somewhere else and work a while. And wasn't for me.
Did you have a family at that point?
I did. Yeah. Yep, I started a family and just wasn't willing to travel and live like that. My dad did that for a while, you know, when he got laid off after the steam engines went out. And he would drive it, and sometimes he would stay. It'd be too far to drive. Pretty tough way to make a living. He'd work 12 hours a day and then have to drive 2 hours each way to work and back home, and didn't get much sleep then either.
Any other stories pop to mind from that list of questions? About either you or your dad?
Well, my dad always said he had the record for a wreck. They'd had a derailment up at Thomas, and they took the wreck train out to clean it all up, and they got some old gondolas out of the car yards here that needed repaired, and they hadn't done the repairs on them. They just grabbed them and took them out to put the tore up coal cars in, and they was coming back around the turn there at Sand Run and upset the wreck train because the cars hadn't been repaired, and they had bearings missing out. The side bearings was missing, and the cars leaned over in the turn and upset and wrecked again.
Oh no.
After they cleaned up the wreck. Yeah.
Were there any other stories that your dad liked to tell?
He had a lot of stories, but one time they was working out of Laurel Bank over there, and they was bringing a coal train up from Hickory Lick Mines, and an engine quit on them, and they couldn't pull the train, so they had to go back and cut so many cars off and take on up to Laurel Bank what they had, and then they go back and get the rest of them. Well, they're going back down the river, and the men are just sitting in there talking, you know, and one of them said, "Now them cars is around this turn," and someone else said, "No, they're a couple turns down." And they popped around the turn, and there was the cars, and they couldn't stop and run into their own train.
Oh no.
Yeah, tore some stuff up. Big investigation over that, but
Oh yeah?
nobody lost their job. They just had to go through a hearing and all that.
What's that like? I don't know if you've ever been through one.
No, never been through one of those hearings. But they had it here at the station. They question each man. It's sort of like being in court, and lawyers are questioning, each other. They'd ask each man the same questions, basically, to try to see if the story would change between any of them. When he lived up at Spruce, they lived in the boarding house up there, and there was no way out of Spruce besides the railroad, so you was there. You didn't hop in your car and go somewhere. You had to come out on a train, and you went in on a train, and that was it. It was a remote town.
Is this that picture that you showed me? Of the boarding house there?
No, that's on down at Laurel Bank. Spruce was long gone before I went to work. They closed the engine house and everything down in Spruce in the late 40s or early 50s.
Oh, okay.
And moved it down to Laurel Bank and made that the engine terminal, where I showed you that picture of the boarding house. That was the engine terminal there. And I don't know what year they closed that terminal. But they tore the boarding house down. I'm going to say in the 90s, probably. And there was an old fella lived up there at Mace named Wes Doyle that worked there all his life. And I was going through there by his house one day. He lived right by the road, so I stopped to see him. And we was talking about Laurel Bank, and he said, worked there all them years. I think he worked there 35 or 40 years. And he said, I never took a picture of that boarding house. And I said, I'll bring you one, because I took that picture, so I made him a copy of it. That made him happy. Yeah.
That's nice.
All the men that worked over there are dead and gone except one. Randy Wilfong's still living.
And how old is he now?
I'd say Randy's in his 70s. I don't know exactly how old he is. I have 2 motor cars. I don't know if you know what a motor car is. Run on the tracks before we had pickup trucks.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 2 of them. One came from here in Elkins, and the other one came from up at Cheap Bridge. And I take them out and go with this Narcoa group that runs on the tracks here and there. But haven't been out for a couple of years.
What got you into them?
Got the opportunity to buy the motor cars off of, the one came from a guy that worked here, and he just retired last year. And he'd got it and fixed it all up, and then he was working still at that time and didn't have time to take it out and run it, so he sold it to me. And then I got in with the group and started running it.
Is it like, what kind of a model is it?
It's I have an M19 Fairmont is the brand name. M19 is the model. And it's a hand crank. It's a 1945 year model. And you start it with a crank and run it. Pretty noisy little machine. And then the other one is an A4 Fairmont. It was made in the 60s. And it has a regular gasoline engine in it. You just start it up and run it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything else from the railroad?
Oh, I have all kind of things I've collected, locks and keys and lanterns and stuff like that. Yeah.
Why do you collect them?
I don't know, it's just, I had some stuff from when I worked here, and then just started buying a piece here or there. And an old man maybe would give me something and stuff like that. And there's an old man that worked up on the GC&E that gave my dad his brass name tag. Well, it didn't have his name on it, it just had a number. They didn't put your name on them in those days. Mm-hmm. And he retired up there at Spruce and gave my dad that identification tag that he had, and I've got it. And I've got his keys, my dad's keys, and his kerosene lantern that he carried when he went to work. stuff like that. Books, I got a lot of the history books.
Was there anyone else in your family that worked for the railroad?
My older brother Eddie went to work the same day I did.
What was his career like?
About like mine, I think he worked there maybe 5 years and got into doing something else. Just, it went, like I say, we get laid off every winter, and it just got to the point where it didn't look like there was much of a future there. So decided better do something else. That's about all I know to tell you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, Ben. We're gonna